Hello and welcome to episode 150 of My Circus, My Monkeys. In our last episode, I had a guest, the lovely Dr. LaShonda Fields, talk a bit about the election and the inauguration of our current president. More specifically, we addressed, and this was the title of the episode, what do we do now? Because so many of us feel that our beliefs, our roles, our students, staff members, and even ourselves are under attack. Now, I wasn't planning on doing another episode focused on the inauguration, but the new administration has jumped in feet first. And based on some recent conversations that I had with both our spring cohort of the Institute, as well as other folks, I think it makes sense here. And specifically, I want to talk about the most important thing you can do for your team and your students right now. So stay tuned. We just started the Spring Institute a few weeks ago, and our first module is always about energy management. One of the assignments is to log your energy every day in relation to what you're doing. And during our first call, folks were sharing a little bit about what they discovered with this assignment. And one individual mentioned that absolutely everything felt draining to them. And that's a huge red flag. Now, we discussed how this could be a sign of burnout, but then the conversation shifted to an overwhelming amount of noise coming from the White House. And that's because we've all suddenly found ourselves bombarded by huge change, or at least the threat of it. During this conversation, I boasted that Trump had cured my social media addiction because every time I'd go to pick up my phone, because that was my habit, I would look at it and go, nope, absolutely not. And of course, this was because there are just so many triggering things, even on posts from my family and friends. And not because they were excited about the change, but because they were worried. And I could feel my energy shift whenever I started scrolling. And other people on the call absolutely agreed. Some folks had turned to cleaning the house. Others had downloaded Candy Crush and other games that they hadn't played in forever just to dissociate from a seemingly overwhelming amount of bad news. And when I say dissociate, I think it's really easy to flip that and accuse folks of tuning out or putting their head in the sand. For myself, I know I've had many internal conversations about how do you stay aware of what's going on without becoming stuck in dread and hopelessness. And this is important, especially if you are leading others. Now, I realized that I needed to address the stress that I was feeling, so I started engaging in things that I find relaxing. But curiously, I noticed that sometimes when I was doing those things, I'd feel guilty that I wasn't freaking out. Because, I mean, isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? Freaking out about everything? And ironically, that's exactly what they want. Now, generally, I hate when people use the ambiguous they, but I think it fits here. They want us to feel exhausted and overwhelmed. They want our nervous systems to shut down because when that happens, eventually we shut up. Freaking out about all these things does absolutely nothing to help us, our team members, or our students. In fact, freaking out keeps our nervous system dysregulated, which means we have less energy to use on anything. And we've talked about this before in many, many episodes. When you go into fight or flight, most of your energy is now consumed by that physiological process. And that means you're not processing the world around you clearly. Last week, I was prepping for ACPA 25, which is in Long Beach, California. Now, we have two relatively small retractable signs that we use for conferences. And since we purchased those, we've been lucky enough to be within driving a distance of the conferences that we attended. But this time we're flying. So I was trying to figure out how this convention exhibit hall thing worked. And it was already a bit stressful figuring out their website and all the different steps. And I even called them so they could walk me through it. So I figured out enough to know that I needed to tell them how much it weighed and what the dimensions were so they would know to expect it. and to pay the handling fee. So that meant I needed to go to FedEx. So went to FedEx, went ahead and shipped it because why would I find out that information and leave FedEx, right? So it was only 22 pounds and not, again, they weren't very big. So shortly after I dropped them off, I went into the website to fill out their forms and was shocked to discover that they have a minimum charge of 200 pounds. That meant I would have to pay $625 in handling, so not even including shipping, to get those 22-pound signs to California. Well, guess whose nervous system flipped the bleep out? That's right, me. Now, I immediately called the FedEx office that I dropped them off at, and I'm like, have they been picked up? And because they're so efficient, of course they had. Now, that amplified my panic. And so I asked desperately, can I get them back? And this woman was very kind, which helped soothe my nervous system. And she said she could transfer me to their customer service rep and versus calling myself, which I'd have to go through a bunch of screens. So should I actually get a person? So I actually said, let me call you back because I needed to check with other people to see what I was supposed to do next. And that's because I was dysregulated and I truly had a hard time deciding what to do. So I called a couple people and it was the middle of the day. So it was the third person before somebody picked up and it was my sister. And I explained the situation and I was like, that is ridiculous, right? Is this a normal amount to pay for something like this? And of course, she was regulated. She immediately knew that was ridiculous, which then helped me clarify the situation and start to regulate. So then I called the FedEx office back. She transferred me to customer service, and that individual was also very helpful. But road bump told me that until the package got to the distribution center, we couldn't reroute it. Now, he turned on text updates. So he just said, once you get notified, just call back and they could easily reroute it to my house. But again, I'd started calming down, but I was still not regulated. So I was kind of freaking out again because I had to teach class in 15 minutes. And what if they texted me and I didn't get back to them immediately and my signs went to Las Vegas on the way to California? Or what if it got there in the middle of the night and I was sleeping? Now, the FedEx rep assured me that it was going to be there sometime that afternoon and I would have plenty of time to call back. And of course, that's exactly what happened. But if he hadn't walked me through it, I would have continued freaking out. And again, worrying about it, freaking out about it, would not have helped me get that package back. And as this was going on, in between calls and texts, I was trying to figure out, well, how are we going to get these signs to California? And I checked, and you cannot check boxes as luggage. And the signs themselves were too big for carry-on. And to my stressed out brain, that was a huge obstacle. And I thought, well, I guess we won't have signs then. And it wasn't until I resolved my package issue with FedEx, it was coming back to me, then my brain started to calm down and come back online. So my recovering brain was able to put together, oh, if these are the maximum measurements for luggage, there are duffel bags, Anne. You used to have one. And those signs can easily fit in them, in the box or without the box. So I texted my sister, who had answered my distress call, hey, do you have a duffel bag? And she replied back, no. And so I jokingly said, and this truly was a joke for me, do you think I could buy one for less than $625? And it honestly wasn't until I made that joke that I remembered I could buy a duffel bag. That's how messed up my brain got because I was dysregulated. Now you'll be happy to know, as I was writing this, I got notified that my package is going to be delivered to me today. So I saved $625 minus the $50 for giving my signs a joyride around town. Now, the reason I'm telling you this story is because it illustrates the impact of the stress response in real time. Now, did I want to spend $625 on sending my signs to California? No. But I could have absorbed the hit if I had to. And this situation was not even as threatening as some of the proposed legislation and executive orders could be for us and the people we care about. Now, I am smart. Non triggered Ann can find many ways to get signs to California. But triggered Ann can't even remember how luggage works. You are smart, but triggered you is not. That is why this is all so crucial. The stress response negatively impacts all the things you need right now to support your team and students while effectively fighting against all the things you're worried about. And that includes your ability to solve problems, your creativity, your relationships, maintaining those relationships, and your overall well being. So, all the tools you need to organize and strategically push back and forward are all being eclipsed by your brain's need for survival. Now, you may be thinking, but this is about survival. But that's not what your brain's definition of survival is. It's just to stay alive. And that means if you stay stuck in this stress response, you are actually more likely to cave in situations where you want to stand up for yourself or others. In fact, after I drafted the script for this episode, I stupidly, in the evening last night, looked at Facebook shortly before going to bed. And I saw, of course, several posts talking about fascism and how we can't do nothing right now, and et cetera, et cetera. And that made me question this very episode. But I know that I'm right about how our nervous system works and what it does to our energy. So I told myself, this was just the stress response doing what it's designed to do, but I could not let it get in the way of me spreading what I knew to be the right message. And that is why the most important thing you can do right now for your team, your students, and yourself is to stay regulated. And the first step in that is taking care of yourself. Audre Lorde's famous self-care quote, and I've said this in many episodes, caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. And wars are not won by freaking out, getting angry, or trash talking the other side. They are won by being organized, strategic, and making sure the troops have the supplies they need to stay strong throughout the course. There have been many a battle lost, not because they weren't motivated or angry enough at their enemy, but because they couldn't sustain the fight. As I was wrestling with these issues myself, I came across a reel somewhere talking about worrying. And I did try to find it again so I could tell you exactly who said it, but I could not. But I do remember it was by a psychologist, so I feel confident about the message. He said that your brain likes to worry because it makes you feel like you're doing something about the problem. But unfortunately, it actually increases anxiety because it reinforces the idea that whatever it is indeed something threatening, and there's not much to be done except worry. Now, in the past 3 months, so even before the election, many folks have been worried about things that both have and haven't happened. From what I've seen, and some folks that I've talked to, often those same folks who are posting or ranting or worrying, they haven't actually done much to stop or fix the things that are happening. I know quite a few people who worried about who was going to win the election, but they didn't actually do anything to impact the outcome. And what might the outcome have been if those folks had volunteered, contributed financially, or even just did more to challenge information they saw and knew was inaccurate? But again, worrying feels like you're doing something. So folks get tricked by their brains into thinking that they were somehow impacting the results just by being worried. And I think that this is in part why I felt guilty for not checking the news or being as angry or upset about some of the people who are posting about everything going on. But unfortunately, you and I being worried only has a negative impact on us. It does not stop anything from happening, and it does not bring about the change we want to see. Think about your own recent worrying. How many things have you gotten upset and worried about lately? A lot? How exhausting has that been for you? Did that worry change anything? No, right? But that worry and that anger drains you of your energy, which means you have little left over to do anything. And you cannot let yourself, your team, or your students get stuck in that place. And don't get me wrong, I am still trying to balance this for myself. And there were absolutely days, and there still are, when I get caught up in this, which leave me feeling exhausted and defeated. But last week, I decided that the most important thing I can do right now is to become as strong as I can be physically, mentally, and emotionally. Because if I can focus on that, I can more easily keep my nervous system regulated. And that allows me the energy and the power to better solve problems, get organized, think strategically, and truly impact what's going on. In our last episode, Dr. Fields talked about finding where you can best contribute and focusing your energy there. In the last Trump term, his administration tried to push through a number of things that ended up being defeated in court. And the same thing's going to happen this time. But are you the person who can challenge the administration in court? No? Yeah, me either. But what I can do, what you can do, is support the ACLU and other organizations that are already doing that. My money is way more valuable to them than my worry. And of course, I am privileged to have the money to donate. If you don't, if students don't, there are other ways that you can support those organizations and their missions. And of course, when we're talking about our strength zone, which we do many times, we've done many times in this podcast, AKA focusing on the things we do best, that's what we're talking about here. Think about what you're good at. Where can you influence things? What is your strength zone? And how can you use that to fight the good fight? Now, some of you may be very, very good at worrying. So you might be tempted to say, ooh, I'll just stick with that. But again, worrying just keeps you dysregulated and it makes the thing feel even bigger. And when you are dysregulated, you have very little bandwidth to do anything productive in this space. Now, I've been talking about how being angry and freaking out alone isn't helpful, but I do want to clarify that this isn't a judgment on you or me. Just like our brains believe worrying is doing something, our brains are also triggered by the unknown. When our brains can't predict what's going to happen next, they can very easily go into fight or flight. And these are absolutely uncertain times. Your brain is doing what it is supposed to do, alert you that something's wrong. It can't predict the future. There is change. But you cannot stay stuck there. We need to give ourselves and others grace because this is inherently a stressful and uncertain time. So this isn't about perfectly navigating fear. It's about doing what we can to support ourselves and the folks around us so we can get our nervous systems regulated as soon as possible after these triggers happen. Last fall, I did an interview with Morgan Star Ristis. It's episode 143 that focused on staying regulated. And you can, of course, listen to that episode for more details. But one thing she suggested is to have a morning and nighttime routine that keeps your nervous system regulated. And that helps train and strengthen your parasympathetic nervous system, aka rest and digest, or if you will, the opposite of fight or flight. And there are quite a few other episodes that I've done that break down other ways to help you manage your stress and energy. And of course, go back and watch those if you have the time. But let's talk about some other things you can do to support yourself and the folks around you. A daily self-care routine is crucial to maintain a healthy and balanced nervous system. This isn't about how long you do something. I want to say that because I know you're already jam-packed full of meetings, tasks, fire putting outing. So I'm talking about 5 to 10 minutes. Small chunks of time, small breaks for your brain to do this throughout the day. And just like there's more than one thing causing your stress, you need to do more than one stress management or self-care activity throughout the day. And it can be as simple as walking between meetings, maybe some chair yoga, jamming out to your favorite song, or doing a meditation. And these days, there are tons of meditation apps that allow you to select a meditation based simply on how long you have. So again, just 5 minutes can make a huge impact. So my dog goes to swimming lessons every week. Okay, it's actually physical therapy where she walks on a treadmill underwater, but that's not nearly as fun to say. So the facility where this PT place is in a specialty veterinary clinic that has an emergency room. So they have a lot of stressful cases. And they have 2 rooms set aside for their team members to go and decompress. It says this is a quiet zone, this is a safe space. They have supplies in there for chair yoga, listening to soothing music, coloring, etc. And in a nutshell, it's a space where folks can go to let their nervous systems re-regulate. Now, I know campus space is usually at a premium, but is there a space where you can set aside some things, a quiet zone, if you will, for your folks and yourself to go de-stress? And what could you put in there to help folks dissociate? Not because they're sticking their heads in the sand, but because constantly being triggered is not helpful for them or your students. I'm currently on a coloring and puzzle kick, which has been very soothing, and neither one of those are very expensive. Thank you cards can be great because it allows folks the space and tools to practice gratitude. Or if you can't set aside a space, can you give folks support packs with things like this in there? Can you set aside part or all of your next meeting to discuss self-care and set the expectation for you and your team that you encourage one another to practice it? Can you set up a walking challenge or some sort of walking schedule to encourage people to take breaks between meetings and move around? Do you give permission for folks to close their door when they need to focus or decompress? Or if people don't have an office, do they have permission to go to a conference room or a study room? And if you're worried that folks will spend all their time in there doing these activities instead of quote unquote being productive, I can assure you they are not currently being productive. Why? That's right, because they are stuck in fight or flight. And I'll just add here that you need to start this practice. I've worked with many supervisors who say they're really good at telling their teams to take care of themselves, but don't practice it. And you need to be a role model here. If they don't see you live it, you're not really giving them permission to do it themselves. Now, finally, I want to talk about the importance of working through this together. We are social beings. That means we need one another to regulate our nervous systems. I'm sure you've had the experience of walking into a meeting feeling perfectly fine, and when you get there, you're met with some weird tension that suddenly makes you feel tense and you don't even know why. That is what is happening with all these social media posts. Someone's worried or angry, so they just drop their worry on their feed, alerting others that you should also be worried or angry. Instead of posting or talking about what you're worried about, we need to help folks regulate and then talk about what they can do to fix the problem. And again, this cannot happen when we are all dysregulated. When I was dealing with my signs, if the lovely FedEx folks had reacted to my freaking out by also freaking out, nothing would have gotten resolved. They were able to stay calm and help me regulate. They could help explain what I didn't know about their process, which led us to a solution. When we were discussing how all of this was impacting folks' energy in our weekly Institute call, one participant thanked us for creating this space where they could talk about how all this was impacting them. And it honestly didn't occur to me until that moment that just by giving people a supportive place to unpack everything is so huge. It's far too easy for us to get stuck in our own thoughts and stories, which again keeps us stuck. When you are freaking out, you need to talk to someone who is more regulated than you are and maybe, hopefully, knows more about that thing than you do. Going around and around in your head often keeps you stuck in the stress response. Talking with people who are also freaking out reinforces your nervous system's panic button. But checking in with people who are regulated can help you see the pieces of the puzzle you're missing. My sister had to help me verify that $625 is too much to spend to ship 2 small signs. That is pretty obvious. And she also helped me remember I could buy luggage. You're going to get triggered plenty in the next few weeks, months, even years. But you need to have spaces where you can process that with folks who are regulated. Your team and your students are going to be triggered, and they need the same thing. Your job as a leader is to give them those spaces and those resources. And like I said earlier, that includes you practicing self-care so you can be a role model for your staff and your students.